BC is the place to be.
As your car ages, it may need higher and higher octane to perform like it used to. But there is a gasoline specially formulated to control this higher octane need while providing the highest level of engine cleanliness. Texaco System 3. You'll get great performance in every octane grade. Still think all gasolines are the same?
Enjoy your first day of school, dear. I'll be in the garden.
Into Turkey. 3 people were pulled out of that group and not allowed to leave. They are the college-age sons of diplomats who were visiting their parents before returning to school. As the U.S. took action against Iraqi diplomats today, officials were expressing the hope that other nations would join in. The strategy being to isolate Iraq in as many ways as possible, even if some of the steps are small ones. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
We'll talk to John again in just a moment. The Secretary General of the UN, Perez de Cuellar, is going to Jordan on Thursday to meet with the Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz. Mr. de Cuellar said this afternoon he's going on his own initiative. He does not have a mandate from the Security Council. He said he's going in the hope that it will lead to an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait. The public word from Iraq today does not give much reason to be optimistic. ABC's Forrest Sawyer is in Baghdad.
Saddam Hussein meeting today with a delegation from Sudan, one of the only countries still willing to visit him, while his government campaigns for peace talks. But Western leaders may find little to discuss. Iraq's information minister says the fate of Kuwait and its former rulers remains non-negotiable.
Kuwait has been restored definitively to Iraq, and the family of al-Sabah are finished for good, and they will never be back.
Withdrawal from Kuwait, says the minister, cannot even be discussed inside his government. Iraqi officials are meeting with UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar this week, only to listen.
We are studying what he wants to offer, what he has to offer, because it is him who has offered to meet us and to dialogue with us.
Iraq's drive to win the hearts and minds of Westerners has taken a new turn. An international satellite broadcast called Guest News, purportedly happy images of foreigners held hostage by the Iraqi government.
Please ring Daddy to tell him I'm fine and we're really being looked after well.
But inside the country, signs of growing strain are everywhere. A demonstration outside the British Embassy.
No, you be quiet. Don't come to my
Daily training sessions of the new civilian popular army put together to fight the Western forces. And the U.S. Embassy is taking its own security measures to discourage terrorism. 67 people remain at the embassy. The U.S. would like to cut that down to just 9, but there is no sign the Iraqis will let any more of them go home. U.S. officials say they will keep pressuring to win the release of the diplomats and dependents still not allowed to leave the country. But for now, key Iraqi authorities are not even returning their phone calls. Forrest Sawyer, ABC News, Baghdad.
There was another warning to Iraq today from the Soviets. In a meeting with the Egyptian foreign minister, Mikhail Gorbachev said that Iraq must find its own way out of what Mr. Gorbachev called this dead end. Mr. Gorbachev says that the Arab countries should join together now against Iraqi aggression. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Sam Nunn, and 7 other U.S. senators reviewed U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia today. Then they flew on to Egypt, where they hope to persuade President Mubarak to commit even more troops to the front line. Senator Nunn said it was enormously important that the Arab nations be part of the frontline forces. As for President Bush's day, here's Ann Compton in Kennebunkport, Maine.
President Bush says he's not counting on any diplomatic breakthrough, not as long as the Iraqi president still claims Kuwait as his own.
Saddam Hussein has been so resistant to complying with international law that I don't yet see fruitful negotiations.
He and visiting Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney were all in favor of the UN Secretary General going to the Mideast to see Iraq's foreign minister. But President Bush said Saddam must not believe that he can keep any of the territory he invaded.
I don't think you should ever say you'll never talk about anything, but I'm not saying that there's any flexibility is what your question is, and there is no flexibility on Iraq getting out of Kuwait and the rulers being permitted to come back to Kuwait.
With that, President Bush went back to enjoying what moments he could of his vacation, taking Prime Minister Mulroney out on his high-speed boat. But the motors on board the boat overheated, forcing the two leaders into a rubber Coast Guard chase boat to get back to port. Tomorrow, President Bush will interrupt his stay in Maine again, returning to Washington for a full 2 days of work. He says his first order of business will be to brief 150 members of Congress on his policy in the Gulf. Ann Compton, ABC News, Kennebunkport.
Well, as Ann Compton reports, a fairly large number of congressmen, senators are going to return to the main political arena in Washington. Joining us tonight from Capitol Hill is ABC's Cokie Roberts. Cokie, as these ladies and gentlemen come back, how much do they change the political equation when it comes for the president's handling of the crisis?
Well, if the president had as one of his options going into all-out war or bombing Iraq back to the Stone Age, I think members of Congress would have something to say about an option like that. They'd certainly want to be consulted at the very least. But I think that they come at a time when you're hearing from members of the administration peaceful solutions. They'll see that as a lot safer, and I think that they'll go along.
Do you expect to hear some nitpicking or fairly universal support for the president continuing?
Well, you'll begin to hear some criticism, no question about that. But the president's done a good job, according to the congressional leaders, of staying in touch with them by phone, getting their support, giving them information which they've passed on to other members. And frankly, as long as the public opinion polls stay so much in support of the president, I don't think you're going to see members of Congress turning against him.
Okay, Cokie Roberts in Washington, thanks very much. Also standing by in Washington, our national security correspondent, John McCarthy. John, we've heard a lot of, over the weekend, about negotiations. Maybe people have a misinterpretation because the president was very hard today. Is there a public line and a private line on this?
It doesn't appear that there is a public and private line, Peter. Pretty much what the administration is saying in public appears to be what they are doing in private as well. They've laid down a series of conditions. Those are the conditions that must be met if the United States is going to negotiate, and those are the conditions the United Nations has laid down as well, Peter.
So how much headway does the administration think it is making with Mr. Hussein?
Well, headway, that's difficult to say, but certainly...
On any front, for that matter. I mean, embargo or politics?
Well, embargo is where the administration is heading right now. They want to see if that economic embargo can actually work, can actually squeeze Saddam Hussein, and they admit it's going to take a while. So it's now a sit-and-wait game for a while.
Cokie Roberts, John McCarthy, thanks. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by the makers of Advil.
Before I even consider taking a medicine, I have to feel good about it. So before I switched from Tylenol to Advil, I did my homework. I found that doctors have recommended Advil over 50 million times, and that over 100 million people have tried it. That includes me. And you know, 2 Advil work better on my really tough headaches than 2 extra-strength Tylenol. Hey, I don't take just any medicine, but I do take Advil. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
Every year, drivers are presented the usual assortment of compact cars. But by using Kansei engineering, Mazda has designed a compact car that doesn't feel like one, the Mazda Protege.
Squeeze in there.
So while we may have created a new kind of car, it seems we also created a new kind of driver. The compact car enthusiast.
Oh, it just feels right. Come on. It'll be fine.
In the Gulf today, American warships have already begun to act on the Security Council's resolution over the weekend, which authorized military moves to enforce the embargo of Iraq. But as ABC's Bob Zelnick reports, there are signs that both the U.S. and Iraq are trying to avoid a confrontation.
Pentagon officials confirm that U.S. warships operating in the Red Sea have intercepted at least 2 cargo ships bound for the Jordanian port of Aqaba during the past 2 days. One of the ships was boarded, but both were allowed to proceed after it was determined their cargo was not bound for Iraq. Officials say the U.S. will continue to intercept Iraqi-bound cargo. But sources say the U.S. warships have been instructed not to stop Iraqi ships heading toward countries which have agreed to the UN embargo against trade with Iraq. That order includes Iraqi tankers bound for Yemen, now that Yemen is refusing to unload Iraqi oil. The rationale, according to one source, why provoke an incident when Iraq can't sell a thing? Baghdad, too, appears anxious to avoid an incident. The U.S. has intercepted at least one Iraqi communication to a tanker, telling it not to resist being stopped by the U.S. On the ground, Pentagon sources say Iraq's frontline troops have been pulled back at least 10 miles from the Kuwaiti border with Saudi Arabia, while U.S. forces remain 15 miles or more on their side of the line. Still, the U.S. buildup continues. Pentagon sources say at least 6 B-52 long-range bombers will head to Saudi Arabia this week. A Marine amphibious force is going on station in the Persian Gulf. Military sources acknowledge that contingency plans exist to drive Iraq from Kuwait by force. But senior administration officials insist that the operative policy now is to make the embargo work. Bob Zelnick, ABC News at the Pentagon.
Another Gulf state has broken with its long tradition of keeping foreigners beyond the horizon. The tiny nation of Qatar is the 5th Gulf state to permit units from the multinational forces to use its military facilities. While the presence of so many American troops is a new experience for Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have long been host to thousands of American civilians who work for the Arabian American Oil Company. Many have been there for years, and they too wonder what they would do if the Iraqis should ever attack. ABC's Charles Glass in Tehran.
Yep. Third. Out of there!
Good old American baseball, but with a difference. Here, the roars come not from the crowd, but from American fighter jets. These oil workers are some of the more than 2,500 Americans who work here for the giant Saudi oil company, Aramco. Aramco was, until 1980, the American-owned Arabian American Oil Company. Its American employees still live in a familiar environment.
The Aramco camp at Dhahran is really just like an American small town. It happens to be in Saudi Arabia. Many of the Americans here are now anxious. They're like people who hear the burglar banging on the window, and they can't get the sheriff to answer the phone.
Since the invasion of Kuwait, these Americans blame Aramco itself for having no plan to get them out in an emergency or to protect them if the fighting reaches here.
There's sort of a feeling in this part of the world that you don't stir people up so much if you don't have a plan.
There's nothing clear and there's no company directive. It's as though a directive would acknowledge that there really is a problem and the company
And they don't want to do that.
There is no imminent danger, business as usual.
Most of Aramco's dependents evacuated after the invasion, but that took a week. Only 1,500 dependents remain. Staff who leave to join their families now will lose their jobs. Aramco keeps their passports, and in an emergency, there might not be time to obtain the exit visas needed to leave Saudi Arabia. How long would it take to evacuate all of Aramco's 12,000 foreign workers and their families? Aramco can't say.
I couldn't really do that, but I think, you know, with the resources we have, we can move very fast. We have all kinds of ways of moving people fast.
Aramco's job is to keep Saudi Arabia's oil flowing, and now to raise production to make up for lost Iraqi and Kuwaiti exports. But without these foreigners, it would have a hard time producing the oil the Western world wants. Charles Glass, ABC News, Dhahran.
Back in just a moment.
Napa, because there are no unimportant parts.
When I want a lightly sweet cookie, I eat a honey-made graham from Nabisco. But when I want a crisp and crunchy cracker, I eat a honey-made graham. But when I want something wholesome with natural honey, like a cookie, that's when I eat a honey-made graham. And when I want something crackling like a cracker, I eat a honey-made graham. But you know, sometimes I want a juicy steak, so I eat a steak. And then I eat...
Honey-made graham's a crunchy cracker, a honey of a cookie, and low-fat, too.
Are your teeth sensitive? Do they hurt? Sensodyne toothpaste can help stop the domino effect that can start with sensitivity. Then pain can make you stop brushing and can lead to tooth loss. Sensodyne toothpaste helps stop the pain and the domino effect. Anything to declare?
Diarrhea.
Oh, permit-me.
Kaopectate.
But of course.
Now, advanced formula kaopectate. Just this much relieves diarrhea and cramps fast.
Vive le kaopectate!
Le diarrhea specialist.
There is another major argument shaping up at home as the result of the Gulf crisis. We've all been party to the who's doing what to whom on the price of gas for the car. But now the smaller independent gas stations are saying that the majors are out to break them as companies. Here's ABC's Stephen Ogg.
For years, independent operators like the East Coast service station chain in Central Virginia have bought gasoline from the major oil companies and sold it under their own names for a few cents less than brand name gasoline. Now, independents are being undersold by the big oil companies.
We are charging as much as 10 cents a gallon more than major oil companies, and we cannot continue to do that and expect our customers to accept it.
In fact, independent service station operators nearly everywhere complain that the major oil companies are responding to President Bush's call for moderation by holding down the price of gasoline they sell under their own names, because that's where prices are most visible. But they're selling at much higher prices to the independents. Officials at major oil companies disagree. They say supplies are tight because independent distributors are trying to build up their inventories.
We believe we have an obligation to our branded network first. And then if there is a surplus available, we make it available to the unbranded network secondly.
If prices continue as they're going now, independent operators say a lot of their stations may go out of business. That, they say, would deprive consumers of the only effective competition they have against the big oil companies. Stephen Ogg, ABC News, Washington.
The hope that tension might be easing in the Gulf sent oil prices plunging on world markets today. Texas crude dropped $4 to less than $27 a barrel. And Wall Street went up. The Dow Jones Industrials gained more than 78 points to close at 2611, and the trading was moderate. In other news today, a new warning from educators that reading is in danger of becoming a lost art. That assessment comes from the College Board, which says that language scores on the Scholastic Aptitude Test they administer were down last year for the 4th year in a row. More than 1 million high school students take the SATs every year. One of the world's leading blues guitarists is dead. Stevie Ray Vaughan was killed early this morning when the helicopter he was in crashed near the southern Wisconsin town of East Troy in foggy weather. There were 4 others with him. Vaughan had just performed in a concert with blues rock star Eric Clapton, who had left in a separate helicopter. Stevie Ray Vaughan was 35. Back in a moment.
Over the past 30 years, more people have taken one brand of sleep aid more than any other for a good night's sleep. Sominex. Sominex has the one ingredient doctors recommend most to help you fall asleep safely without worry. Safe, simple Sominex.
Did you know your small business should have AT&T long distance?
What for? With MCI, I'm getting big savings.
But you could get AT&T quality.
Who cares? I'm getting big savings.
But AT&T prices are extremely competitive.
Competitive? Hey, I'm getting big savings.
Okay, for that call from New York to Los Angeles, here's your big savings.
2 cents? That's not big savings.
Competitive price. Another AT&T advantage.
The Honda Civic 4-door sedan. It comes with a roomy interior, large, comfortable seats, 4-wheel double wishbone suspension, and an advanced 16-valve fuel-injected engine. Unfortunately, some colors are not yet available.
Red Lobster.
Tonight, 30 shrimp, just $8.99.
Red Lobster for the seafood.
Scabby and oh, golden fried.
Red Lobster for the seafood lover.
Grilled and lemon pepper. 30 shrimp on one plate, just $8.99.
Red Lobster for the seafood lover in you.
Kids get a shrimp dinner for just $1.99 and a free hidden treasure pack.
Because of all the news from the Middle East, we have not been concentrating for the last 4 weeks on those important issues we normally deal with on the American agenda. But tonight's report is about a way the Middle East could be made a lot less critical to the U.S. Tonight's agenda is reported by ABC's Ned Potter. It's a natural alternative to Middle East oil, American natural gas.
Our jobs, our way of life, our own freedom, and the freedom of friendly countries around the world would all suffer if control of the world's great oil reserves fell into the hands of that one man, Saddam Hussein.
Hey, to your right! If, as the president says, freedom itself is threatened by who controls oil, then America's best defenses are not just the ones it sends to the Persian Gulf. Many of them are here at home. These men are drilling not for oil, but for natural gas. You mostly see it used for cooking or heating, but it can also power cars and buses. And in the long run, it may be a way to avoid future energy crises. It has 3 advantages over gasoline. It is cheaper, like filling up for 70 cents a gallon. It can reduce some auto emissions 85%. And it would help ease America's addiction to oil from the Persian Gulf. This rig is about a mile off Port Aransas, Texas, and that points out the main political advantage of natural gas.
Fully 93% of our supply is domestic. It is unlikely that we will ever have to buy any from the Middle East.
The United States and a lot of the Western states especially really are Saudi Arabias of natural gas. There's a lot of it available.
We convert 15% of the automobiles in the United States. We free up 1 million barrels of oil a day, imports, and that more than exceeds the combined oil imports from Iraq and Kuwait.
The conversion process is not very complicated. Natural gas can be used in regular engines with some modifications. With a sturdy tank, it is safer than gasoline. There is already a national network of supply lines, and filling stations like this one in Denver are already tapping into it. Giant companies like General Motors have announced they will build trucks that run on natural gas. Their original reason was the environment, not the Gulf crisis. States like Texas and California are pushing for cleaner fuels than oil, and natural gas leads the list.
We see this as the future. We believe it's going to change the way America thinks about transportation.
There are drawbacks. You can rarely go more than 200 miles before a fill-up. And for lack of filling stations, natural gas may at first be limited to fleet vehicles, like delivery trucks, that can fill up at central garages. But designers thought of that. If you take a natural gas vehicle on a long trip, you can go back to regular gasoline at the flick of a switch. Lee Arsenault is part of a Canadian project involving 17,000 cars. He no longer even needs filling stations. He fills up at home from the same line that supplies the family's kitchen stove.
The last one in the evening plugs in the car, so you just pop the hood and it takes about 20 seconds at the outside.
It cost $2,300 to add extra tanks to Arsenault's van, but Canadian government subsidies paid for almost all of it. That is far more than the American government has done.
We haven't really heard you call upon Americans to conserve as part of this crisis.
I call upon Americans to conserve.
Elaborate?
No, I think we ought to conserve in times like this. On the other hand, we're doing everything we can to guarantee that we don't panic Americans. And
the president says the priority is to protect America's oil supply, but his critics say he misses the point. The U.S. is spending $1.2 billion in 2 months to station troops around Iraq, but less than $600 million this year on alternative fuels or better efficiency. In the long run, reducing the need for imported oil may be cheaper and less dangerous than sending troops to the Middle East. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
We'll be back in just a moment.
Please pay attention. For a quick escape from the airport, avoid long lines and proceed to the nearest exit. Insert your national card into the Smart Key machine. Select your car. And frequent flyer program. Within seconds, your completed rental agreement and car keys will appear. Then proceed directly to your car. National Smart Key. Faster to use than it is to explain.
My daughter asked me, since when have you been eating Cheerios? Since I learned nutrition can be simple, I told her. Nutrition simple, she says? Look, Cheerios is whole grain oats with all the oat bran. Nutrition made simple. Want a bowl or what? Today, it's getting hard to spot some denture wearers because they don't look or feel like denture wearers. They use Extra Hold Fast Teeth. It has a thin, powerful seal that's stronger than any leading powder and virtually airtight. Extra Hold Fast Teeth. Nothing's closer to real.
Introducing the prescription strength cure for athlete's foot. New Lotramin AF, the #1 prescribed athlete's foot medication, is now available without a prescription. New Lotramin AF, the prescription strength cure for athlete's foot.
Love the vegetables. Hate the gas.
The healthier you eat, the more you may need Gas X for the fastest gas pain relief. Relief antacids can't give you.
So eat right and feel right with Gas X.
Tonight on Nightline, the UN effort to negotiate a settlement in the Persian Gulf with the U.S. ambassador to the UN, the Iraqi ambassador to the U.S., and Forrest Sawyer from Baghdad. Tonight.
Before we leave, the latest developments regarding the Gulf crisis. The State Department has ordered 2/3 of the Iraqi diplomats at the embassy in Washington to leave the country. Earlier, Iraq released 52 American diplomats and dependents who'd left Kuwait last week. At the last moment, the Iraqis would not allow 3 other dependents, the sons of diplomats, to leave for Turkey. And President Bush said today he sees nothing going on that might form the basis for fruitful negotiations. That's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. More on Nightline. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
A presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.